All right, guys, if you can have a seat so we can get started. Have a seat, please, so we can get started.
All right. Can I get a thumbs up from somebody in the front row in the library that you can hear us? Yes, thank you. All right. Good morning. Hey, GDS. I need eyes on me. All right. Good morning. Happy Friday. Welcome to the Summit on Sexual Assault and Consent Assembly. Woo! So, for those who do not know, the summit was founded 6 years ago by a GDS alumna, Tice Christian, who participated in the Policy Institute. And then she decided that she wanted to extend the conversation about the issue of sexual assault and the intricacies of consent beyond GDS's school walls. So in 2 weeks, November 19th and 20th, we are kicking off the 6th iteration of the summit. And it has grown from being super local to a national conference. We still have registration open for GDS students. So if you haven't signed up, you totally should. You'll hear more about that in just a bit. But what is so special about the summit and what has always been so special is that it was conceptualized by a student, it is organized by students, and it is organized for students, right? And so this is something by you all, for you all, and we really would love to have as many. Oh, sorry, everybody. Okay, hi, library folks. So this is really organized by you all and for you all. So with that, I am going to turn it over to two of our student leaders for this year's event. They are seniors Maya and Maddie, and they are going to welcome our speaker.
Hi, guys. Can you guys hear me? Yeah? Perfect. I'm Maya. This is Maddie. And we are so excited to welcome you all to the first ever pre-summit assembly. It is an absolute, it is an absolute honor to introduce our speaker today, Kenyora Parham. Kenyora is the executive director of End Rape on Campus. A champion of resilience and empowerment, Kenyora believes in walking in your own truth with the courage to love yourself first, then others. With an analytical and creative solutions mindset, Kenyora has served over the past decade working with youth and families, college students and administrators, community and government leaders, including the late Mayor Thomas M. Menino of Boston and Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley in her former capacity as the Boston City Councilwoman. Prior to joining EROC, she has worked for several nonprofit organizations and higher education institutions, including Brandeis University, Strong Women, Strong Girls, and Simmons University. Kenyora currently serves on several boards, including serving as president of the African American Alumni Association of Simmons University and an advisory board member of the Every Voice Coalition. Formerly, Kenyora served on the Alumni Association board at Boston University's School of Social Work. She is also the co-founder of Students Rise International.
Kenyora also holds a certificate in community leadership and social change from the Jonathan M. Tisch College of Civic Life at Tufts University through the Institute for Nonprofit Practice, which she serves as a founder for their CFP Ambassador Program. In 2016, Kenyora was recognized as a finalist for the Extraordinary Women campaign led by the Mayor's Office of Women's Advancement in Boston, Massachusetts. She's also a proud alumna of Girls Incorporated of Lynn, Massachusetts, and a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. She resides in the DMV area with her husband, Franklin, and their two cats, King and Leo. This year's summit theme is awareness to action, and there's no better person than Kenyora who can come speak about exactly that, how to take a topic of such interest and enthusiasm and also nuance and then that requires such care and attention, and then mobilize. Kenyora is an activist in every meaning of the word. In her many roles in recent years, she has defined the action component of our entire summit, and she's here to talk about that today.
So really quickly, GDS students, because this is our first in-person speaker in a really long time, I just want to remind you all that we need to be really respectful while Kenyora is here with us. So phones away, please, and eyes on her. Let's give her our full attention, okay? All right, give it up for Kenyora.
So thank you, Maddie and Maya, and thank you to Georgetown Day School for this invitation. I'd like to ask you all 2 questions. You don't have to answer them out loud, but when you have your answer, just raise your hand to indicate that you got it. And I promise I won't call on you, at least not yet. So my first question to you is, who is the first person to speak to you about the birds and the bees? Sex. Raise your hand. My second question to you is, who is the first person to speak to you about establishing boundaries, recognizing the power to say no, or telling someone of authority if your space has been violated? Raise your hands high. Okay. Now you can lower your hands. Now I'd like to invite you to close your eyes if you like, or keep them open in whichever is comfortable to you. Now picture this. A young, full of life, 14-year-old. She wears many braids in her hair that reach the nape of her neck. You can see her racing her friends, especially the boys, to the fire hydrant located at the end of the block, always coming in first place. She's a straight A student who loves to read and attend school. And she thinks to herself, I'm going to work for a big financial corporation one day. She has many friends her age and is particularly close to her older sister. But then one day she meets a young man whom she thinks she loves and who she thinks loves her back. He's 18 and a high school dropout. One day she finds herself pregnant. In fact, she didn't even know she was pregnant until she was in active labor. She's lost, confused, and also trying to figure out what is she going to do, what her next steps may be. That's my mother's story. And I like to believe that she may not have had to experience such an adult-like event if someone talked to her and provided her with access to resources that were more than just the birds and the bees conversation. So in the next few minutes, you're going to learn 3 benefits you'll gain when you attend the GDS Summit on Sexual Assault and Consent on November 19th through 20th. And those 3 benefits are called the triple A's: access, autonomy, and agents of change. So the first A, access. Now, earlier I mentioned that my mother didn't have the initial information and knowledge on sex, consent, and self-autonomy. In fact, my mom was unfortunately a part of the statistic that states Black girls experience at least one form of sexual violence by the age of 18. Like many Black girls, my mom's sense of girlhood was erased. She was adultified and infantilized at the same time. History and stereotypes of Black girls and women underlie the implicit bias that shapes many adults' views of Black females as sexually promiscuous, hedonistic, and in need of socialization. And that's according to Georgetown Law School's report, Girlhood Interrupted, the Erasure of Black Girls' Childhood. Or in other words, my mom was forced to endure pain and trauma and with the expectation to be resilient, push through, and become an adult overnight. I remember having a conversation with my mom where she said, Kenyora, I remember back when I was 14 years old that the moment you were born, I fell in love with you because I knew I didn't want you to be a part of the same cycle, the same statistic. So what did my mom do? She made another adult decision, and she took a job right away working under the table at a local restaurant. She even took me to class at Lynn Classical High School, located in Lynn, Massachusetts, where I can recall sitting in my mom's class with my coloring books and watching her and her fellow peers look at this person in the front of the room, lecturing them about some worldly topic. Through conviction and determination, my mom made sure to expose me to education at a very young age. From reading books to me and taking me to classes, my mom also made sure to buy books about puberty and masturbation. My mom even attempted to draw the anatomy of human body, including stick figure graphics of bodies and genitalia. My mom was determined to make sure that I felt comfortable with her enough to talk about sex. And when I mean sex, I mean everything from sex itself to someone crossing the line to innuendos and sexual references that I was often surrounded or often overheard. So, how many of you are familiar with Netflix sex education? Raise your hand. My mom was somewhat like Jean Milburn. With very little information, my mom turned what some would define as a life altering and hindering experience into one that breaks generational curses and something better than what she had. She signed me up for Girls Incorporated, an after school program dedicated to empowering inner city girls by providing them with the tools and means to equip them to be bold, smart, and confident. Additionally, my mom empowered me to sign up for other extracurricular activities once I entered middle school and high school, such as drama club, Latin club, the dance team, the dog squad, and even cheerleading for 1 year. So that way I'd be exposed to the myriad of activities that only she had a brief moment to experience. With access, my mother turned trial into triumph. You have access that most of your peers across the United States do not have. To host a space that empowers its students to gain knowledge and understanding on sexual assault and consent beyond the traditional sex education curriculum is monumental. Having access is a powerful tool for you as you commit yourselves to combat sexual assault in order to maintain a safe, inclusive, and respectful learning environment. So where are my GDS administrators, staff, teachers at? If y'all can raise your hands for me, just so I can see who's in the room. Amazing. To quote a small part from the GDS philosophy itself, believing that students have obligations to others as well as themselves, we expect students to respect others, to appreciate other successes, and to work hard toward their own. So I'd like to just send a friendly reminder that this commitment isn't solely on your students. It is to be a collaborative effort and one that is ingrained in the GDS values, policies, and action. This means going above and beyond the annual Summit of Sexual Assault and Consent, from the hiring processes to educational programs to conducting investigations when a report may happen. Administrators of GDS, your commitment is about putting your students first above your bottom line. By leading by example, you are fostering a community and culture that is centered on not just access, but safety and accountability. And without these, you just have failure. So with access, you can take your philosophy and bring it to reality. The second A, autonomy. Now, this is where my story gets a little bit complex. How do you truly ingrain in a child at the age of 5 what it means to have bodily autonomy? Can someone in the audience want to describe for me what they think their definition of autonomy is? Go ahead. Absolutely. And having a choice, absolutely. Anyone want to add to that? It's okay. Well, will that 5-year-old understand? Maybe on the surface. Will they truly capture what you subtly imply and overtly express? How will they grow to understand these nuggets of wisdom as they grow and mature and come into their own sense of self? So unfortunately, despite my mom's teachings, I had my own harrowing experience of sexual assault at the tender age of 9. And for the sake of re-traumatizing anyone here, I will spare those details because those details are not important here. But I will share something significant and important with you. I did not tell anyone. Now you may be asking yourself, why didn't I say anything to anyone, to my mother? Why didn't I listen to what my mother had told me? Well, first, let me just say that's victim thinking, victim blaming thinking, or as Kate Hardin, author of Asking for It, The Alarming Rise of Rape Culture and What We Can Do About It, says, rape culture encourages us to scrutinize victim stories for any evidence that they brought violence upon themselves, and always to imagine ourselves in the terrifying role of good person, falsely excused before we rush to judgment. She continues to argue that when it comes to rape, if we're expected to put ourselves in anyone else's shoes, it's often that of the accused rapist. Yet again, I will answer in a resounding no. I did not say anything at all. Not until I was your age, in fact, in high school, and not on my own accord. And the reason I didn't say anything is because as the only child, I didn't want my mother to have to relive her own trauma and possibly making a choice that would have ended badly. So I made another adult decision for her and for myself. Throughout my life, I compartmentalized what happened to me as an insignificant part of my life's trajectory, not realizing how, as I got older, I was more keenly aware of how sexual assault showed up throughout my life, whether indirectly or directly. So I carried on with my life. I was seen as a bubbly social butterfly, smart, and even in high school was voted most likely to succeed. Later on, when I forged on to obtain my undergrad and graduate degrees at Simmons University and Boston University School of Social Work, respectfully, I would experience intimate partner violence and sexual harassment a few more times, some of which I didn't understand was happening at first until reflecting on it months or even years later. Autonomy as sexual citizenship, as defined by Columbia University professor Jennifer Hirsch and Princeton University professor Seamus Khan, authors of Sexual Citizenship, a landmark study of power and assault on campus. They define autonomy or sexual citizenship as the acknowledgement of one's own right to sexual self-determination, and importantly, recognizes the equivalent right in others. A socially produced sense of enfranchisement and right to sexual agency. According to the ACLU, while almost all students receive some variation of sexuality education in high school, many do not receive any before 10th grade, at which time 2 in 10 girls and 3 in 10 boys are already sexually active. However, when we go further into other evidence-based research, the most underserved population are transgender and non-binary youth, who often left vulnerable to negative outcomes because of the inaccuracy that sex education tends to not cover. So as high school students at Georgetown Day School, you are part of a very small cohort of states mandated by law or policy that schools provide sexual education. You have an administration that recognizes your autonomy and empowers you to recognize it within yourselves. You have the chance to dive deeper than the basics of sexually transmitted diseases, pregnancy, or condom use. You are the generation that recognizes that your peers, your teachers, and administrators are more than the binary and have multiple identities that make them not only unique, but remarkable. You have the ability to recognize your self-worth, your self-autonomy, and self-expression. And you have a community surrounding you and supporting your ability to truly garner a global perspective. So as you recognize your autonomy, you can reclaim your power. The third A, agents of change. So what brought me to my position as executive director of a national leading voice on ending campus sexual assault? Well, I began with a tidbit about my mother. She is still a part of why I'm in this position. And of course, I also experienced sexual assault, unfortunately. But I will also state that it's because of the women-centered spaces that I've had the chance and honor to be a part of. As an alum of Girls Incorporated, an alum of Simmons University, a lifetime member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, I've always believed in the empowerment and educational development of women and girls and those who are at the intersections of their identities. I believe that in order for one to have a full sense of self, they have to have the ability to derive from the past, discover in the present, and define for their future. So now that you have access, and now that you understand your autonomy, what are you going to do with this information? Are you going to tuck it away? Or will you become agents of change and be a part of the generation that finally puts an end to sexual violence? You are a part of a generation that is demanding cultural change in the midst of racial reckoning and misogynistic turmoil. You're a part of your school's history that sought to make the change from within in order to make change beyond. So here are 3 ways you can be agents of change right in your own backyard. 1, continue to be lifelong learners. 2, share what you learn with others. And 3, and most importantly, whenever someone invites you in by sharing their story of sexual assault, listen to them and believe them. I like to think that I've taken the access that I've gained over time, the autonomy that I've been able to recognize within myself, and utilize what I've learned to be the agent of change by designing pathways to be in service of marginalized communities. As I grew to understand my path in life, I actually thought I wanted to be an architectural engineer, side note. But what I quickly realized is that it wasn't building skyscrapers and new homes. It was building systems and designing pathways for women and girls of color who often succumb to society's pressures and systemic oppression. So at NRAPE on campus, through our Centering the Margins framework, we are doing just that. Creating spaces for those who are often historically excluded and systemically oppressed, and digital solutions to end campus sexual assault. Because as my beloved sister in service and fellow survivor and advocate, Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley has stated, those closest to the pain must be closest to the power. So sign up for your upcoming summit on sexual assault and consent scheduled for November 19th through the 20th. Take advantage of the wealth of access and opportunity you have created for yourselves and each other. Recognize your autonomy and take all that knowledge and power and be the agent of change for your community and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kenyora, for that amazing talk. We have it. Give it up one more time for Kenyora. That was spectacular. So now we're going to open up the floor to questions. Just a reminder that anybody can ask a question now, whether you're in the forum, in the library, joining us from home. If you are joining virtually, feel free to type a question in the chat. We'll be monitoring that. And yeah, any questions for Kenyora on what she said, on the work that she did, or on the summit, if you have any questions on that, feel free to just raise your hand and Maddie will bring you the microphone.
What motivated you to work for NRAPE on campus? Or not like what motivated you, but like how did you hear about it? How did you get involved? What steps did you take to become involved?
So what motivated me to get involved with NRAPE on campus? What steps did I take? What's funny is I was dealing with another sort of trauma, organizational trauma. And that I experienced in my last year at Strong Women, Strong Girls. And then when I transitioned to Brandeis University, working as an assistant director of pre-college programs, I experienced more of that. What I came to conclude for myself is that I needed to find a space that allows me to be who I am, authentically me. And so my husband and I, he's from Alabama. he had stated, whoever gets a job first, that's where we're going to move to. So we were looking everywhere from California to Houston to Atlanta to New York. And I've always wanted to be in DC. So I came across NRAPE on campus. I applied for originally the chief of staff position. I applied. Within a week later, got a call back for an interview. And that same day of the interview, I got a call back because I got the job. Flew to DC and moved all of our belongings to DC within the next couple of weeks. I think I even gave my employer at Brandeis less than 2 weeks notice, which is a big no-no. But at the time and under those circumstances, I was just like, deuces, I'm out. So we left to DC and I became the chief of staff of NRAPE on campus. And in that capacity, I was actually the person behind the scenes, the kind of the executive director internally, where I was essentially creating the space and work environment that I never had for my fellow staff. And then a year later, kind of hit a bump in the road, and then I became executive director. But I like to think a lot of this wasn't just due to the circumstances of my life, but just was a part of what I was destined to be a part of. I think everything happens for a reason, and I'm just glad that I'm here and in this position to lead. That's a great question. Thank you.
Other questions? Raise your hands. Are there any from the library too? Oh yeah, I see Edie moving.
We've got a question. We've got a question up here. We're just getting the mic.
So thank you so much for coming to speak with us. I personally found it really validating, everything that you said. I was just wondering, how can women, specifically like Black, I should say, non-male people, how can we like unlearn the things that society teaches us about our bodies and our sexual identities, and sort of how can we unlearn some of the objectification that we endure each day? Thank you.
So the question is, how can we unlearn?
Michelle, can you repeat?
Yeah, can you hear me okay? So the question is, how can we unlearn, especially as non-male people, how can we unlearn some of the objectification of our bodies and the messages we've been given about our bodies?
That's a whole other day. No, I'm kidding. Honestly, it just starts with educating yourself, not being afraid to ask questions, and not being afraid to just dive deeper into the unknown. Sometimes there are things that you're not going to know because you're not exposed to those things. But the more that you continue to be curious and asking questions, the more you'll continue to unlearn things. I think, unfortunately, we're in this time of TikTok and Twitter and other social media platforms, and even the movies we watch and the award shows that we're watching, and the musicians and artists that we love, maybe giving us those opposite images of ourselves. And so sometimes it's hard to unlearn because you see what may be popular, what's on and popping, what might be lit. And we tend to give into those images and those ideas of ourselves. We internalize those things because they're constantly barraged in front of us, constantly. So it's hard to unlearn those things. But the way that I've been able to unlearn really is through books. If anyone, Maddie and Maya, have seen my books and the back, my virtual background, and that's just one bookshelf. I have 3 like that, and they're color coordinated because that's just me. But what I've done is I've found books written by authors of folks that look like me. Like right now, I have Anita Hill's book, Believing, in my bag, because I want to be constantly barraging myself with images of folks who look like me, because I never actually had that growing up. I grew up in a predominantly white small town, fairly big, Lynn, Massachusetts. And I always just often thought that everyone was the same. I've had friends who were Asian, who were white, who were Dominican. I'm actually Afro Latina, but I always just saw myself as the next person. And then it wasn't until I grew older, I recognized there are differences. We are unique. And that, like I said, is what makes us remarkable. But at the same time, I had to recognize that there were some things that weren't afforded to me as they were with my counterparts. So I just would continue to ingrain myself in books by authors who looked like me. I would attend, even as I got older, different shows and conferences, somewhat like this, with speakers who looked like me. And I actually made it a point to watch more television shows with people who look like me. And so I just that constant barrage of, bringing in more images of myself, but at the same time, also not being afraid to be uncomfortable and attending certain spaces where there are folks who I wanted to learn from. And not that it was their job to teach me, but it was my job to at least be, open to the possibilities of another's perspective.
Do we have any more questions? Oh yeah, amazing.
Good morning. My question is, what should people do? What is the appropriate and the best thing that you can do if you know if you know an assailant, if you know someone has been assaulted? What do you think is the best thing that you can do to make it a safer place for the survivor and just for other people who might be next on the person's list or whatever? What do you think is the best the best thing you can do as someone who might be an ally or whatever?
So if someone's an ally, what's the best course of action they should take if they know someone has been sexually assaulted or they know someone has assaulted someone? The second part of that. Both? That's a very good question, and I'm so glad you asked that. When you first learn that someone has been sexually assaulted and they come to you and they divulge and disclose that information to you, it's because one, they trust you enough to share their story with you, and they're inviting you in to something of a very harrowing and traumatic experience. And that takes a lot of courage and bravery for someone to do that. So when someone comes to you and says, this is what happened to me, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing to do is listen and believe them. That right there goes a long way. Because oftentimes, a lot of folks are not believed when they tell someone that they've been sexually assaulted. So just by believing them allows them to then continue to push through that courage and follow whatever next steps they want to take. So as you're listening to them and you're believing them, you don't even have to say much other than, thank you so much for inviting me in and sharing this with me. I'm so sorry that this happened to you. I believe you. How can I support you? Even if it's just me sitting here and, listening to you. Do you want me to tell someone on your behalf? What does support look like for you? And just let it go from there. The moment that you learn of someone assaulting someone, particularly if it's in a bystander situation, and I'll give you two kind of scenarios. Let's say you're at a party and you're noticing someone is assaulting someone. You can, provide some bystander intervention methods where you assess the situation and you decide you're going to intervene yourself and bring other folks in with you to stop that assault from happening. But if it's something where you've learned from elsewhere about a person who's assaulted someone, speak to someone of a high authority about what you've learned. Particularly, I'm not sure who that would be at GDS, but whomever that is at GDS, you go to them and say, this is what I'm hearing. I'm not sure if it's true, but just by way of you reporting it up to someone of authority, then they are mandated to take on those next steps. But if you're also talking about someone who might be in your own family, because I know there's a lot of sexual assaults that occur within the family, it's typically done by someone you know. That's where things get a little bit trickier. But what you would want to do is go to someone within your family that you trust and who you can invite in and say, hey, this is what I know about this person. And then family will just take it from there. And then I would also say reaching out to any local rape crisis centers as well. Those are typically open 24/7, or even the national hotlines like RAIN, the hotline, national domestic violence hotline. And then for anyone who might be transgender, there's the Trans Lifeline that's also open 24/7, and the Trevor Project, which also helps with LGBTQIA. Long-winded answer, but I hope that answered your question. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, does the library have any more questions? We probably have time for one more. Yes. Do you see movement? I don't know.
I don't see
We don't have any hands raised up here.
Does anyone have any questions in the forum? Yes.
Hi, thank you for coming. What's your opinion on kind of like the intersection of how social media has become a place where a lot of people will post like their attackers or like vice versa and call out people like on Instagram or platforms like that? Like, do you find, I mean, I guess it's a case by case basis, but just what's your opinion on how social media affects this overall?
Honestly, I think social media, it has its pros and cons, right? I feel that youth and students nowadays, whether you're a high school student or a college student, because we're in this time where colleges and some high schools throughout the nation aren't doing their part with addressing sexual assaults, students have had to find alternative ways to get their messaging out there and to be seen and to be heard. And it may be anonymous in some ways, but it's another outlet in a sense to say, hey, this is what's happening to me and I need someone to just at least believe me, even if they don't know who I am. Just the fact that I was able to get these words out on paper or on the digital screen, that's enough of what I need to know. And then what you start to see is more of these stories happening, all of these pop-ups of Instagram accounts happening. You have a group called the University Survivors Movement, which started a number of these anonymous Instagram groups. They also gathered around because it wasn't just about sharing their story, but also how to take their story and turn it into action. So they came together last year and held nationwide protests across the different states to state, hello, we need to do something on campus sexual assault. At the same time, there are some folks who tend to announce and divulge who their assaulter is. I will actually refrain anyone from sharing the name of the person who accused you because you could be liable for defamation, which just basically means someone can sue you for stating that they have done something, even though there's no necessarily, I don't want to say proof, but by putting their name out there, you're defaming their character before they even have a chance to go through the system, essentially. So I would refrain from that and do everything legally. But at the same time, again, it's because people are trying to be heard and their voices are trying to get their voice out there. And so they have to go through what seems like a drastic measure of using social media as another way to drive that forward. So I think it's good in some cases because then what you're seeing is community being built around that. an action being built around that. But at the same time, you have to toe that fine line in terms of legalities, because that's where it gets tricky. Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you. And thank you all for having me. I'm so blessed to be here. And I just want to say that not only am I your first in-person guest, but you're my first in-person audience. And so thank you.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kenyora, for this incredible discussion. I've done a lot of summit work recently, and I've learned a lot. And I think it's a really great takeaway for the GDS student body as a whole to know that we do have this autonomy, and we're definitely agents of change who have access to do this really important work. We have just a few reminders before we send everyone off. So the first one is that Kenyora is sticking around to speak with GDS students and faculty at lunch in the quiet side. If you have any unanswered questions, or you prefer some more intimate conversation, or just looking for an extension of this wonderful speech that Kenyora has given us today, come join us in the quiet side. We will provide dessert to all who join us. Amazing. And
Yeah, and a second reminder, registration for the summit is open. You can find the link in your email or using the QR code on any of the flyers and posters hung up around the school. The summit will be taking place virtually this year on November 19th and November 20th. Students will be able to hear from a panel of sexual assault survivors, attend 4 different workshops on topics ranging from the neuroscience behind trauma to pornography literacy. You can hear from a spectacular keynote and then brainstorm ways to bring all that you've learned back to the GDS community. So please, please, please register. Signups close on November 12th. Remember, even though the summit is virtual, we're going to have the GDS campus open for any students who are able to be together in person. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to myself, Maddie, Lee, or Monique. We would love to see you there. And once again, thank you so much, Kenyora, for coming to speak to us. That's it.